Welcome to Moving Conversations, a podcast for movement professionals by movement professionals. If you coach, train, or teach movement, Pilates, or fitness, then this podcast is for you. With more than 60 years of experience in fitness and Pilates, your hosts, Brian Ritchie and Nora St. John, explore the science of human movement, diving deep into the facts, myths, and common misconceptions, hoping to spark thought and conversation about how we view fitness and movement. Now, let's jump into Moving Conversations. And welcome back to Moving Conversations. I'm Brian Ritchie. Joining me as always is Nora St. John. Good morning, Nora. How are you doing this today?
Quite well, thank you, Brian. There's some sunshine out, but I actually have a sweater on for the first time since maybe April.
Wow.
I'm in California, guys, so I've had nothing but short sleeves on for like the last several months. It's a little chilly this morning. Quite nice. It'll be warmer this afternoon, but fall is upon us.
I've always found that amazing about Sacramento in that it can be 100 degrees at 2 o'clock, but in the evening it'll be 68. In the morning it's 65. It's unlike DC where if it's 2 o'clock, we're at 85, 90 degrees with a ton of humidity. It's still that hot at 10 o'clock at night. It doesn't come down.
It is really a nice thing. There's something about it, I think that they call it the Delta breeze that sucks in the cold Pacific Ocean air up the river, basically, nice. And ends up. I've lost you there. And ends up, cooling us down. It just like I think the heat of the valley sucks the cold air in a really nice way.
Our area in DC is between two bodies of water.
Somebody's freezing.
So because of that being between two bodies of water, what's interesting about it is during the winter, we can be without a whole lot of, snow and all of that sort of thing, snow and ice. But we also sort of get in this like heat bubble that just sort of stifles us, Yeah,
you do. Yeah, we don't.
Yeah.
It gets really hot. In the summer, it gets really hot, but it'll always cool down at night. It's usually under 70 at night. And it's usually, really pleasant until 8 or 9 or 10 in the morning, depending. Could be 105 at 5 o'clock, but at 10 in the morning, at 9 in the morning, it'll be like 72.
That's awesome.
It's gorgeous. Yeah.
Well, today, the topic that we've decided to do is the shoulder. We're calling it the synergy of the shoulder. And originally, just so everyone who's listening can be a little privy of what we were discussing last week. What's always interesting is we turn off the mic and then you and I talk for another 20 or 30 minutes. And the conversation is sometimes just as interesting as what we just talked about. And we have to say, wait, hold that for next week. Hold that for next week. And we were trying to decide whether we were going to talk about the scapulothoracic, because that's such an incredibly important joint, or the glenohumeral joint, what most people consider to be the shoulder joint. But we decided, you know what, let's do the synergy of it. Let's focus much more on the anatomy and kinesiology aspect of it this week, the function. And then we can get into things like rotator cuff impingement and all of that kind of stuff as a separate one. So consider that a part 2 that we'll hit in upcoming, weeks. Maybe next week, maybe the week after, we'll figure that out. But so today we're going to do sort of the synergy of the shoulder, talking about the function.
So the key thing we have to start with here is that the shoulder is such a complex, interconnected part of the body, right? It influences the cervical spine. It influences the thoracic spine. It floats on the rib cage, which influences the movement of the scapula. It's connected to the axial skeleton through the clavicle.
Yep.
And then you have the whole glenohumeral joint, which has its, big ball, little socket, all of its mobility. All of those players work together on almost anything you do with the shoulder.
Yeah, everything basically from mid-rib cage, mid-spine up, from like T12 up is going to be influenced in some way, shape, or form by what we do with the shoulder joint. Or when I say shoulder joint, I'm going to be combining all 4 joints. Why don't we talk about that right now?
The whole picture.
Yeah, the whole picture.
The shoulder complex.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we do know it's made of 4 joints. We have the sternoclavicular joint, which is where the clavicle and the sternum connect, which is actually the only really fastened area of, let's say, the entire shoulder joint when we're talking about the scapula. The scapula sits on that point at the clavicle, and it connects to the clavicle via the acromioclavicular joint. And then,
but the clavicle, right? The clavicle can move.
oh
So
yeah,
play for a moment, play with that. But remember, that is, to Brian's point, the only thing that connects us into the stability of the axial skeleton
yeah,
is at that sternoclavicular joint.
yeah.
Everything else is mobile,
And it just
very
floats.
mobile.
It's
It
very mobile.
floats.
It floats there. Something that one of our good friends, Joy Puleo, mentions in her anatomy classes that I've stolen many, many times, is if you took the arm and everything and just took off all of the connective tissue and all you had was a skeleton, what's going to happen? The humerus is just going to fall down because it is not connected whatsoever to the scapula at the glenohumeral joint. And that scapula itself is going to fall downward and just sort of hang there by our SC joint, our sternoclavicular joint. That's the only real place that we have sort of a functioning axis for a rotation that's attached to our axial skeleton.
Right. Actually, it's the axis of elevation, depression, protraction, retraction.
Yep.
And again, we think of a lot of that happening at the scapula.
Right.
When you talk about the movement of the shoulder, we think about it from the scapula. We don't think about it from the clavicle.
Right.
And I think that's just something to be aware of, and for somebody to think about. Like, even you guys who are listening to this, take a moment and just put your fingers on that sternoclavicular joint and just move your shoulders around and see how critical the movement at that joint is for the rest of the rest of the shoulder girdle.
Yeah, if you think about it, how I always sort of thought of this was take half of a teeter-totter or seesaw. That sternoclavicular joint really is where that center point is, that everything rotates and moves around. So while everybody looks at the scapula, looks at the humerus as it's moving, really that's the kid going up and down on the end. But
Yes.
the point that it is rotating around, and again, this is not just up and down. We're not talking about just abduction, adduction. We're talking about three-dimensional movement.
Yeah.
All takes place around that one joint. So it has to be a very strong joint.
And the funny thing about it is that it is kind of a strong joint, but it's really only held together by ligaments.
Yes.
There's not a lot of muscles that cross that joint. The sternoclavicular, the SCM, sternocleidomastoid, a little bit crosses that joint, but really it's primarily held together by ligaments. And one thing to think about there is if you have something like a clavicle fracture, right, or a dislocation of the sternoclavicular joint, either of those things can disorient and disorganize the entire structure.
100%.
Right, because again, if that clavicle isn't moving, if for some reason it's like stuck to the rib cage behind it, or the joint has gotten distorted in some way or gotten arthritic, that's going to influence how everything in the entire shoulder girdle works.
And because that it is held on just by ligament, those ligaments have to be a little extra strong. So they are actually infused with calcium. There's some calcium infusion in there that gives it a little bit more of inherent stability, because we don't often hear about dislocation of that joint as much as we're going to hear a breaking of the actual clavicle.
Right.
Which is good, because if it did dislocate, that would be really bad. And it's incredibly painful when that does occur.
Yeah, I actually dislocated mine, and this just points to my relative hypermobility, because I was carrying a cross-shoulder, kind of heavy cross-shoulder bag, like a messenger bag, for when I was an acupuncturist, and I was carrying all my stuff everywhere. And one morning I woke up and I went to the mirror and I looked, and it's like, oh, my clavicle on one side was like a half an inch higher on one side than the other.
Wow.
It had just literally slipped out of place. I kind of popped it back in, and then we were good to go. There was a little discomfort, but there was that moment when it was out of whack, and I realized, like, oh, my entire shoulder does not work like it's supposed to. It really was a graphic, personal feeling of, oh, yeah, if that's not connected, everything doesn't know what to do, right? Everything else is dependent on that stability.
So that's the SC joint. That's a sternoclavicular joint. Now, the acromioclavicular joint would be, to me, the weakest of the joints in that, and probably the one that becomes, forget the term, but most problematic. That's the one that you're going to hear the most about in my realm of medical exercise. We hear a lot of the AC joint because that we're either going to get inflammation there, we're going to get impingement there, or things around that area are what's going to often have issues with around the acromion.
Or Or dislocation, right? Because if somebody
dislocation.
falls on an outstretched hand, like the classic volleyball, I know it's fairly common.
Yep.
Rollerblading is fairly common. You fall on an outstretched hand, that's the joint that will typically slip, slide, or displace.
Yep. And when you do hear of someone who has a complete dislocation, those are the ligaments that are the ones that are ruptured.
Yeah. Exactly. That's a typical issue. So you've got arthritis issues, and you also have wear and tear there, right?
Yep.
So a lot of the other things you're pointing to are that's an area that gets a lot of wear and tear from just everyday activities or heavy duty activities.
Yep. Next would be the glenohumeral joint, and that's the one that we typically think of as the shoulder joint. If I were to ask a ninth grader, where's the shoulder joint? That's what they're going to point to.
Yep, absolutely.
That's the shoulder. And that's where the humerus sits into the socket. And again, unlike the hip, we always talk about a ball and socket. I'd say cup and saucer, because really there's not a deepening. It's not a huge deep concavity that it sits deep into. And there's no ligament structure holding that in there.
No, it's a big ball, tiny socket.
Yeah.
And extremely mobile ligaments. So, to your point, one example I use there is I worked with several clients who'd had strokes. So they'd lost muscular control on one side of their body. And you'll see like acromion, and then there's like a little stair step. You step down to the head of the humerus.
Interesting.
Because without the muscular support, the ligaments are really relatively loose there because they need to provide a lot of mobility.
Yep.
Again, ligaments, remember, really only keep us from going past our end range.
Yep.
And the end ranges in the shoulder are really big. They're not tiny little end ranges. You've got a lot of range there. So the ligaments are not very tight.
Yeah, and when we talk about ball and socket, everybody wants to say shoulder and hip, shoulder and hip. And those are the two that we typically think about. But if you think about which one's has more mobility, now let's not talk about dancers. Let's talk about the general population. But our shoulder has unbelievable, just take your arm and start swinging it around. It has an unbelievable amount of mobility in comparison to the hip, where we have a deeper socket. We have ligament structures holding it in place. So that's the big difference. And now we do have a labral system, the labrum there, that does deepen the socket a little bit, provides a little bit better joint congruency. And that can be an issue for some people, especially if they have a little hypermobility issues. But that's, like I say, that's the joint that we typically think of when we think of the shoulder joint.
And its issue is its mobility, right? Managing the mobility of that joint is a lot of what we're looking at in terms of managing it.
Yep.
And the last one is our scapulothoracic joint.
Yes. And that's more of a stability joint.
And it's also it's not a traditional joint because it's essentially like scapula thoracic. It's where the scapula sits on the rib cage, on the back of the rib cage. And again, it's not a bone to bone connection. It's bone floating on layers of muscle and bones underneath that.
Yep.
So again, it's a moving bone, but it doesn't have that typical, bone to bone connection in terms of a joint.
Yeah, how I've heard it described as a non-physiologic joint, because it doesn't have your typical bone meets bone.
Right.
It's bone sitting on top of muscle, sitting on top of muscle, sitting on top of muscle, sitting on top of the bone. So there's a lot in between when it comes to connective tissue between the two.
Yep.
And
exactly, which makes it different.
Yeah. And it has a lot of mobility. Even though it's a joint that we talk about for stability, because we need it to stabilize to give the shoulder strength. If you think about how much we can elevate, protract, retract, upward and downward rotation, depression, there's a lot of movement in that joint, a lot more than people think.
I've always had a little trouble with that being considered a stability joint. Like, I understand functionally it has to have a certain level of stability in order for the whole shoulder girdle to work. But I also look at it and go, one of the challenges that I think of from a training perspective, and certainly from a rehab perspective, is I work with the scapula just as much on stability as I work on mobility.
Absolutely.
Right? I've got clients who are completely stuck in their scapula, and that's inhibiting the function of the shoulder joint. I have clients who are super hypermobile in their scapula and their scapulothoracic joint, that it's causing all kinds of disruption as well.
Yep.
So, with the whole shoulder, I'm always looking at where they are on the continuum of stability or lack of mobility, really, through to hypermobility. Like, where are they on that scale? Because that'll often determine how I train that client. Am I going to focus on stability? Am I going to focus on mobility? Or am I going to have to do a little bit of both, depending on where they're at?
And that's just it. The client's goals are really going, and what you determine their goals are for this, because we do have some clients. I've had some dancers come to me who, in order to have a certain look, they've depressed their scapula for so many years that they can elevate their arms, in creating a little bit of impingement, and suddenly they have nerve pain down their hands or numbness, tingling, but their scapula doesn't want to move. They've literally tried to fixate it for their profession.
Right.
You know?
Exactly.
And I know a lot of Pilates and even yoga instructors who cue that. Even with taking the arm up, they want to cue shoulders down. And it's sort of, well, I understand you don't want the shoulders up in the ears. You're trying to get your trapezius out of the being so fully engaged and being a prime mover, but we really need to have that moving. We need elevation.
One of the things that, coming from Pilates land and coming from being a dancer for a million years as well, on top of that, there can be, we talked about this with the neck too, a little bit of an overemphasis on that scapular depression for some clients.
Right.
And one of the things that, and I'm getting kind of right into some deep waters here, but one of the things that I find with clients who do tend to lift their shoulders is the two pieces are often missing. One is they have a hard time upwardly rotating the scapula when that arm goes up. So a lot of times it's actually a lack of mobility of the scapulothoracic joint in upward rotation that decreases their ability to lift the arm up overhead without the upper trap and the upper part of the shoulder getting involved. That's one piece. The second piece is the lack of strength, really, and connection from the lower trapezius to really maintain the stability of that scapula as that arm's coming up. So it's really working on both the upward rotation and the downward rotation pieces, and that those are not working well. And that's often where that shoulder tends to come up and over and elevate.
Yep. And something you just said that I find is lacking in just about everybody who I see is the lower trapezius.
Yeah, it's not an area that most people have strength in.
No, it's usually...
or awareness of.
Right. It's usually the weakest link. And when you do make them aware of it, there's like, oh, there's muscle there. Oh, okay, I can feel this now. Because what most people don't realize is that as we elevate the arm overhead, there does come a point where there's where the scapula is, that it elevates, and then it actually at the end will begin to depress. That lower trapezius will actually help pull it down and give it more room to move. And that does work.
That's exactly right. So, and now, guys, follow us at home. I know this is all audio, but there we go. If you take one arm out to the side, and I take it out at an angle, I'm not all the way up near my ears. I'm kind of at maybe a 45-degree angle from 90 degrees, so halfway between 90 degrees and all the way up at my head. And reach the arm away and pull the arm back in. Reach the arm away and pull the arm back in. And with that angle, you start to feel that you can actually feel the bottom tip of the scapula move in towards your spine. That's the lower trapezius that we're talking about.
Yep.
Is that ability of that bottom part of the scapula to come down and in. Remember that, well, you may not remember, but I'll tell you, the trapezius attaches down to T12 at the bottom of the thoracic, and that's that connection from that bottom tip of the scapula down to like T12. And that's the area that we're talking about, is that low part of the thorax and its connection to the scapulothoracic joint.
Yeah. Let's talk muscularly. Okay, we talked about joints. Let's talk about muscle, because I found it fascinating the first time I actually looked at the scapula, because you look at back muscles. And again, I came much more from the personal training environment. And, when I first got into it, like almost all males, you look at all the bodybuilding, books and things. So that was where my brain was 30 odd years ago. And then I found out that there are, I think, 13 muscles that attach to the scapula that allow that movement. That's huge. That is a ton of musculature to attach to one bone to allow it to stabilize and move properly. Because again, if it was just stable, if we just wanted it to lock down like some people think it might, why would there be so many muscles attached to it? No, it's meant to move. We need that movement.
And this is where that concept that we started with of synergy comes into play.
Exactly.
Because all those muscles that attach to the scapula, either attaching it to the spine, attaching it to the head, attaching it to the arm, all those complexities need to work in harmony, ideally, to create the appropriate movement of and really movements of those muscles to move the scapula the way you want to move it. I use two different concepts here. One is that the scapula is like an island. That's a floating island, basically, or like, a blow up thing in your pool. And the muscles are going to be pulling it in any direction because they kind of can pull it up, down, right, left, and out. The other idea that I have there is that a lot of the muscles that support the scapula are like dance partners. Mm-hmm. That one is going to be isometrically contracting or eccentrically contracting, while one is concentrically contracting. And there's all these partnerships around the scapula where you're really trying to create that synergy between two maybe in that moment opposing muscles, mm-hmm. to really create the balance and the stability and the strength and support of the scapulothoracic joint.
I love that analogy because, like dance partners, as one contracts, the other has to stretch.
Yep.
So there has to be that give and take between, one pulls, one pushes, one pulls, one pushes, or one lifts as one depresses. And, if you think of just when I look at it from the back, and I remember years ago, you and I were talking about this, and you said, wouldn't it be cool if we could, with bungees, try and figure out a way to make all of the muscles of the scapula work properly on one of our mannequins, our skeletons. And it was almost impossible because of all the different directions that they pull at all times. As one,
and all the different layers,
as one is in just a simple thing, like think about upward rotation, where the scapula is actually rotating outward and upward. Certain muscles are contracting. Other one, the muscles that are contracting that are actually doing the elevation, and the other ones are lengthening. The lower trapezius is lengthening. Traps 3 and 4 are lengthening. We have a little bit of length going on in the levator scapula as it comes down and you just look at it thinking, wow, okay, all of these are lifting it and all of these are actually rotating it and pulling down. And in the opposite motion, those are all what's returning it. So it was one of these things that we looked at thinking, wow, how can we do that? And it is one of those things where you look at the human body and think it's kind of one of the perfect machines, because all of these things are designed to make this shoulder joint work as optimally as possible. And I don't think you can make it any better.
Well, given the demands on it, again, they mostly last forever. Like, how does that work? Right? They mostly last forever. I mean, again, everybody's got issues, but they mostly last forever. And they do an amazing amount of things. I mean, everything from, climbing a mountain or doing rock climbing. I'm kind of thinking of American Ninja Warriors, what I'm thinking of there, right? Crazy upper body strength, to people who do manual labor. I'm thinking of like a friend of mine was a bricklayer and a mason, moving big things and getting them organized, to, lifting kids, throwing things around, pitching balls.
Yep.
So many things that we have to do with that upper body.
Yeah.
And all those muscles, beautifully for us, work in a generally unconsciously coordinated fashion.
Well, if you think of athletics, like baseball, or where you have to throw the ball, okay, the amount of synergistic movements that have to occur throughout the entire body is unbelievable, but just in the shoulder joint, to make sure that they don't injure themselves, to make sure that their arm has enough power that can throw from, I used to be a catcher, so I used to have to pop up and actually make it throw it to second base and have that be dead point accurate. And I could do it every time without a problem. And I had to have velocity on it. And that's a huge distance. And you're thinking, wow, the amount of strength, and I had to do it repetitively. It's not just once, but repetitively. Someone from right field has to be able to throw it, almost 100 yards to get it to home plate. And they can do it, some of them, without even, a one bounce, just straight in. The amount of strength that has to be generated is unbelievable. And again, has to be repeated, not just once, but repeated. That's incredible.
And it's not just the strength. I mean, we talk about this sometimes in terms of fascia, right? It's that timing of the recoil and the release, right? That you can throw a ball at apparently 90 miles an hour, or 80 and 90 if you're a professional ball player, and where that force gets generated, and then how it moves through all those parts of the body at the right timing to actually generate that force and deliver it to the ball. And that is that synergy, that complex organization of all the bits.
Yep.
So let's talk about a couple of those. Let's see if we can exampleize a couple of those.
Yep.
So a very simple one that I often start with is thinking about the serratus anterior and the rhomboids. Right, so serratus anterior attaches from the medial inside the body border of the scapula around to the ribs, right, to like 1 through 9 ribs in the front.
So
like
your scapula is kind of sitting on top of it.
Yeah, exactly. Scapula sits on top of it. And it attaches to that back corner, right? That medial corner closest to your spine in the scapula. And then from that medial border of the scapula closest to your spine, the rhomboids go up and attach into your thoracic spine.
Yep.
Right? So you kind of have this band of muscle that goes from the front of your ribs around to your spinous processes, right? From front to back. And the scapula, right between the serratus and the rhomboids, they can place those scapula anywhere on that path, right? They can move it forward into protraction, the scapula, and then the serratus pulls it forward and the rhomboids stretch. You can do it into retraction, the rhomboids pull it together and the serratus stretches, and anywhere in between there.
Yep.
Right, where that scapula is sitting in kind of the front back plane, in the sagittal plane, if you will, or really just sort of the front back plane, right? Those are organizing that.
Yeah. And those are just the two main muscles, because we also have additional ones that are assisting on top of that as well. So yeah, they are definitely working together to create that motion. And you're right, it is sort of the sagittal plane. I was just thinking about that going, would it be transverse? It's sort of, the motion feels like it's sort of elliptical, but it's not. It's more of an oblique plane. Let's just say oblique plane, because it's not a traditional sagittal or frontal or
no
transverse. But yeah, working together to keep that motion forward and back, protraction to retraction.
And along with that, our trapezius, which does a lot of very complex things, and I'll talk about its synergy in a moment, but basically, right, then it's also connecting, this time now, the clavicle and the top of the acromion in towards the spine, and the scapular spine in towards the spine.
Yep.
So it can also assist with that retraction.
Yep.
And may get some stretching on the protraction.
And the pec minor does the protraction.
Exactly. And then you've got the pec minor on the front, and even the pec major on the front.
Sure.
It's not attached to the scapula, but it's going to be participating in that protraction.
Absolutely.
Right? Pulling not the scapula, but the humerus forward along with the scapula. So that's already multiple layers that are all working together, and do a bunch of other things at the same time. Like, one of the things about the dance partner analogy is this is really like a square dance where the partners are continually changing who they're working with to do different tasks.
Yes. And I love how you said the working together, because when we see muscular imbalances, and that's something we see all the time, that's when one dance partner is trying to do way too much, and another one is trying to sit out and has a limp going on and a hitch in their giddy up, and they're not really working as much. And someone else is trying to do too much. And we see that imbalance.
Yep.
And in protraction or retraction, we often see it way too much in the protraction.
Right. And in that case, it may be the serratus, but a lot of times that's the pec.
Yep.
And pec minor and the pec major that are pulling those shoulders forward, rounding the back, creating a little bit of kyphosis, like the typical kind of hunched posture, right?
Exactly. And then you can even get, if you want to go further and add in the humerus, because we did with the pec major.
Right.
We have the internal rotator, which will then pull that rounded even further forward and have that humerus now rotate forward and the palms rotate
Yep.
backward. So you can see how
Yep.
everything is sort of leaning toward that. And if we look at the rotator cuff, what's it doing? We have one on the one side, we have that subscapularis, and we have two really on the other side with the infraspinatus and teres minor, which are pulling against that. So you have that synergy, one pulling forward, a good sized one, two smaller ones pulling back, and then we have the supraspinatus, which is actually pulling more of an upward angle. So again, creating that balance, creating that synergy to work together when they need to.
One of the things that I think you've done this, I think we've done this together, but I know I've done it, I learned it, I loved it, was, imagine, for those of you in the audience, imagine you have a ball under your hand, right? Like it could be a big ball, it could be a small ball. If you have a ball in your hand and you're basically trying to like roll your hand over that ball, right? Or, maybe you're petting your dog. Like there's a lot of ways to think about this, but any of those kind of small motions, I'm not thinking of a lot of force or effort, but just feel or think how much that humerus is moving in the glenoid fossa, right? You just like your arm is moving as you do that. And this is where another analogy comes into here, right? Each of those rotator cuff muscles is working in tiny ways to optimize and manage the position of that humerus in the glenoid fossa.
Yep.
And they're going from internal rotation to external rotation. So they're trading off like relay racers, right? Okay, first, if I'm internally rotated, I'm exaggerating here, internally rotating, my subscapularis is in action. Then I go to neutral, then I go to lateral rotation, and suddenly the back muscles are working,
Yep.
right? And it's that concentric, eccentric action that they're constantly playing back and forth with. And again, ideally in the right timing and the right amount of effort and force and angle to keep that humerus well centered in the socket.
Right. Yep. And that's something that I don't think people give that to as much thought and credit as that really needs to have happen. Because as I was even just sitting here, I'm looking at the mouse on my desk. When people are moving their mouse, it's the same thing. Because rarely do they just move it with their wrist. They're using their whole shoulder, their whole arm.
In small ranges, little tiny ranges.
Small ranges. And neurologically, we have to have those signals constantly telling our brain where our body is in space proprioceptively and what muscles are firing. And it's done in such small give and take. So it's not huge movements like throwing a ball might be. They're very small movements, micro, adjustments that are constantly being made in order to make sure that humerus is sitting properly within the joint. Because when it's not, that's when we start getting issues.
Yeah. Right. One other image that I use there, and some of you probably heard this from me before if you've been a lecturer of mine, but you think about a rocket. You think about a rocket ship. And you think about the big rocket that pushes it into orbit, right? Right, whole lot of power. That's like our external muscles in that case, not our rotator cuff muscles, like our deltoid and our other muscles, our pec muscles and those kind of things. And then once you get into space where there's no gravity, other things, they have those little tiny booster rockets, those little tiny, like little put, little tiny boosters that do those much more subtle adjustments. I always think of the rotator cuff as those subtle booster rockets. It's not the like get you into space. That's your lat and your pec and your big power muscles. But all those guys are involved to just orient that, in that case, spaceship, in our case, humerus, where it needs to be in that socket.
And that rotator cuff has such an important job because it lies so deep that it has to do those micro movements. Because when we're firing our deltoid in something like a lateral raise where we're doing pure abduction out to the side, what would naturally happen is the orientation of the deltoid would want to pull that humerus directly into the scapula, into the acromion. So so the rotator cuff's job is to, hey, I got to pull this down. I got to make sure it's working right. I got to keep it properly centered in the joint so that the big, strong deltoid doesn't take it out of that natural path that it needs to be in.
Right, isn't the bully.
Right.
Because those big superficial muscles can bully, for sure, the rotator cuff. And in that role can, for example, pull the humerus forward. I think about a lot of the people that I train when they do like a chest press or they do something on the reformer like a cervitray. And I watch and that humerus like slides forward almost out of that glenoid fossa, right? It really over exaggerates, not a protraction, but really literally space in that joint. They lose that connection and that stability at the head of that humerus. And that's really where, like, you want to keep working on that humeral head, because as soon as that starts to open up, whether it's from just a simple muscle exercise like that or throwing something with a lot more force, and you start to throw that humeral head around in the glenoid fossa, that's when you get irritation, you get an annoyed area, you get arthritis, you get other kinds of issues in there. Right? Because again, you're allowing that joint to lose its stability. And to really become a little wild in there.
You and I years ago taught a class together called the Forgotten Five, where 5 muscles that tend to atrophy with age and disuse. If you don't use it, you're going to lose it, basically. And the rotator cuff is one of those. Because I've seen in cadavers where that rotator cuff on an older person, someone probably in their 90s, I didn't do any carbon dating, so I don't know for sure. But the person was frail, let's say that. But it was like rice paper. The rotator cuff was so thin, it was like rice paper. And had a dowager's hump and postural issues you could just see in the skeleton. But it gets so thin because it's not used as much. And it definitely comes down to you have to use it. I think almost every training session should involve some rotator cuff, should involve something to do to create a little bit more integrity of that joint from an inner level, not just the outer big muscles.
No, because you're not going to see them anyway, right? The rotator cuff, you're never going to see what those muscles are doing from an external perspective. And the thing about the rotator cuff, if we're going to go there, is you don't have to work it hard. It's an endurance muscle. Right? Just, I'm sitting here at my desk right now and I'm just medially and laterally rotating my humerus, just an internal rotation, external rotation. That alone is going to just keep that area woken up, keep that coordination alert in my nervous system, and allow those muscles to maintain a little bit of strength. They don't need a lot of resistance. They just need to be worked, and they need to be worked regularly, especially in many ways, the lateral rotators, because if you think about, again, daily posture is going to be typically internally rotated, pronated with the hands. And we don't do that external rotation. We don't do that lateral rotation of the humerus. We don't open up the chest. We don't extend the thoracic spine. All those pieces that go together. And that's what we lose also as we age a lot. And people just give in to gravity.
It's funny that you mentioned just doing that rotation. When my wife and I were first dating, she had an office job and she started complaining about her rotator cuff. She just said, it's hurting and I don't know why. And it was, of course, her mousing hand. And she didn't have any equipment. She didn't have anything with her at work. And I said, just do this. And I literally said, imagine you have a band in your hand. You're just going to do internal and external rotation 20 times. That's it. Do that 2 or 3 times a day. I said, you're just trying to turn those muscles back on to just get a little blood flow there, get it working, remind it what its job is, and it made a world of difference. She didn't really need any resistance. And it just shows you how important that muscle is to balance out the natural movements of the glenohumeral joint and how important that is. And we kind of jumped into the glenohumeral joint from the scapulothoracic, but they go hand in hand, and they're so important.
They go hand in hand. Absolutely.
If you want to do abduction of the arm, you need to be able to move the scapulothoracic joint. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about movement quality now, because we want to get into, how are we supposed to move? Because we talk about glenohumeral rhythm, so we can get into that a little bit. And what is proper glenohumeral rhythm?
So this is where I really, again, this dance partner concept, how do the parts work together optimally? And the key thing that I always look at with clients and want to assess with clients is, can they lift their arms up? Can they lift them? And it doesn't matter, it could be abduction, it can be in flexion in front. Can they lift them above 80 or 90 degrees? What happens when they do? Like, just as a question. And a lot of times when I first have a client do that, all I'll see is that whole shoulder will elevate, and that will happen first, and the arm will rise up second.
Yep.
Right. And basically at that point, their shoulder is in their ear, and they're often like, oh, my neck is sore if I do too many of those.
Yep.
So the thing that I want to have happen instead, ideally, we'll see, is I'm gonna back this down a good way. So the first step is that let's gonna take abduction. My arm starts to go into abduction.
Mm-hmm.
In those first 30 degrees of abduction, my supraspinatus, that one part of the rotator cuff that's kind of on top of the shoulder, is very gently pushing that humeral head slightly inferior, slightly down. It kind of pulls that humeral head up, but also pushes the ball slightly down in the socket.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's like step one. Then as I start to lift the arm up beyond that, my deltoid's going to go beyond that, right? Start to pull that arm up, but that's going to work better if that supraspinatus is gently pushed the head of the ball down. Then as I start to rise up, I've got lots of options. I can do that with my upper trapezius,
Mm-hmm.
right? I can just take that and lift my shoulder up. I can also do that with my whole trapezius, right? So I'm going to think about that like I'm going to lengthen my lat a little bit at the back, and then my trapezius, if I think about it, lifting up the front of my clavicle is my upper trapezius. Inside of my acromion is my middle trapezius, and then the scapular spine is my lower trapezius. If I focus here on that lower trapezius, pulling that scapular spine down at an angle, creating upward rotation of the scapula, then I don't actually have to use quite so much of my upper trapezius.
So the trapezius
that
basically,
was complicated.
Well, how I'm seeing it is
Yeah.
the upper trapezius, or excuse me, the trapezius in general is actually pulling the uppermost portion of the scapula downward toward the spine. It's pulling it toward the spine, allowing the bottom tip of the scapula to be able to rotate outward and upward. It's kind of how I'm seeing it.
And it's lifting the clavicle up.
Yes.
So the clavicle's coming up, scapula's kind of going down, right? Because the clavicle lifts up with that upper trapezius, and then the spine gets pulled down if you've got a strong lower trapezius.
Yep.
Which we talked about earlier.
And when we talk about scapulohumeral rhythm and abduction, that first 30 degrees, the scapula really isn't moving. But
no, it doesn't have to.
After that, for every 2 degrees of your humerus moving, you're going to have about 1 degree of scapular movement. So there's usually about a 2 to 1
rotation,
in upward rotation. Yes, right. Ideally, correct. So that's what we would consider sort of ideal scapulohumeral rhythm. Mm-hmm. Not everybody has that. Some people it turns on. I've seen this a million times. It's one of the assessments I do. I watch from behind and I watch that upward rotation as they take their arm out, and I watch side to side, and you'll see one where that scapula will begin moving immediately because they're starting to elevate. And the other side, it goes 20, 30, 40, 50. Hello, is it going to go? Is it going to move? Is it going to move? Okay, it's moving now. It has sort of a delayed reaction. And, so everybody has a little bit of difference. And nobody's necessarily perfect. But it's one of those things that we can begin to train a little bit. We can begin to cue a little bit to get the side that's a little stickier, that doesn't want to move, to get that to move a little bit more. And the one that's sort of, I hate to use the word hypermobile, let's just say overactive. Upper trapezius a little overactive. It's over anxious. It wants to help out so much. Yeah, it's trying so hard to lift.
Yeah.
But to remind the lower trapezius, hey, your job is to pull this portion down. I need to pull that spine of the scapula down as my clavicle goes up, and that bottom tip is going to rotate outward and upward.
One of the things that I've been working on a lot, I think hopefully that was clear to you guys, and this is just verbal, which is harder than visual, but hopefully that worked for you. One of the things that I find a lot, and I've been really playing with this a lot, is yes, occasionally there'll be an overactive scapulothoracic participation there, but typically that's an elevation, not an upward rotation. Mm-hmm. Right? That they'll start to just lift the shoulder and the arm will kind of follow with that. What I've started to play with and cue in a somewhat exaggerated way till people get the idea is in abduction to lift it from the scapula. Mm-hmm. So rather than the arm pulling the scapula out into upward rotation or pulling the scapula up, which is sometimes how it's like, think about as soon as you get even close to 90 degrees, somewhere between until you talk to 80 degrees ish, as soon as you start to get there, think about the scapula, the upward rotation of the scapula, lifting the arm up, like creating the base for the arm to do its job. And that's never how it's thought of, and it's not how it's felt. We in the arms, I think because of the strong proprioceptive neurological feedback from the hands, we tend to have the hand feedback lead the shoulder. Right. So, and that's very typical. You think about the arms, think about throwing something, hitting something. It's the hand that has the first signal that then tells the rest of the body what to do. And in this case, it's like, think about what if you lift the shoulder first? What if you actually think about that shoulder coming up in upward rotation and watch that lift the arm? Just an idea. It's a thought to throw in your head.
And whenever I watch younger trainers and people in general, watch where their eyes are looking. If they're doing a lateral raise, where are they looking? They're looking at the hand. You know, and that's kind of where your client's brain is too. It
is because again, the hands are so strong neurologically.
Right. So they're thinking about that aspect of it, whereas an experienced, you know, instructor will be watching much closer. Well, we're watching the whole thing, but we'll be watching where's the scapula sitting, where's the humerus. We're watching more of that motion because that's the important part. But by cueing them to think about that and to tell them that where the hand ends up, I don't care. Because truthfully, it doesn't matter. In a lateral raise where I'm taking my arms out to the side, it doesn't matter if it stops at 60 degrees or 90 degrees or goes even higher. It doesn't matter. If it's not causing pain or discomfort, it can go where it wants to go. But I want to cue them to be able to have freedom of movement and to allow that shoulder blade, to allow that scapula to actually rotate outward. And like you said, by cueing that, you're actually putting their mind into different muscles that can actually benefit them in the long term much better.
And one of the things I want to add to that is, I don't know about you, but when I've tried to help a new client understand what their scapula is doing, it's tough. They're like, my what? It does what? I use the analogy sometimes that we're like paper dolls. We're actually like two-dimensional paper dolls that are only printed on one side, because anything behind us, we tend to be invisible. Our glutes, the back of our shoulders, our shoulder blades, our hamstrings, like that tends to be kind of the neurological dead zone. We can't see it. It doesn't exist. So, so one of the things that I have to do, again, like I'm saying, yes, just make them upwardly rotate. And your client, and if you're out there as a trainer, you're going, yeah, right. How in God's name do I get them to do that? Because they don't know where the scapula is or where it's going or anything else. So one of the things that I'll often do with that is, you know, again, if it's appropriate to touch them, I'll gently have my hands on their shoulder blades, and I will kind of follow that motion up. Right, I'll actually have my hands there as they take that arm up and almost encourage that bottom tip of the scapula to go into upward rotation, so they can feel it. And it just, even if I just have my hands on the scapula through their clothes and they can feel the scapula moving under my hand, that gives them some kind of feedback.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise it is like, it's just the blind leading the blind. They don't know what you're talking about.
Absolutely. I've often used my fingertips occasionally at the tip of the scapula.
Yeah, exactly.
And said, can you feel this? And I'll move it back and forth just a little bit and say, now I want you to wiggle this with your muscles, and they'll wiggle a little bit. Okay, yeah. Now, as you take your arm out, I want this to go, and I'll gently, when I say gently assist, I'm putting like a half a pound of help. I'm barely touching it.
Just very gently move it,
But it's giving them proprioceptive feedback that they're like,
exactly.
Oh, okay. And you do that for 1 or 2 repetitions, then you take your hands off, and all of a sudden they can do it because you've put their mind into the muscle and into the bone. Proprioceptively, you've woken it up.
Yes, exactly.
I've had to do this a lot with retraction because a lot of people who have postural issues, I'm thinking of a gentleman that I had who had Parkinson's, and he was so rounded. I mean, he literally looked like a bear. He was so rounded that I was wondering if the muscle was so stretched out that it just couldn't contract. You know, because I was thinking it was not moving. What did I have to do? I literally had to pull his shoulder blades together manually. You know, I put him in a corner with his hands on the wall, lean forward, And I literally used my hands and pulled him back and said, now hold this. Now come away from the wall. Hold it. Don't lose it. Don't lose it. Don't lose it. And suddenly he's like, oh, I could feel that a little. And again, Parkinson's made it a lot more challenging. And I've used that technique on different people before because they can get into that position. They're like, oh yeah, I can feel that now. Now pull away from the wall and have their hands are still in the air. And now hold that position. Okay, I can feel that squeeze. Now let your arms down. Now put it right back. And they'll put it back and they're like, oh, and you've woken it up.
Right. You've got to teach people how to move their scapula.
Yes.
I find 99% of the time. It's such a blank spot.
Yep.
And if you're working with the shoulder and they don't have some ability to move that area with some awareness, you can't quite make the progress that you may want to make.
Yep.
Unless they have really good movement patterns naturally, which many people do, but many people don't. And if they really don't, you've got to really work on getting those movement patterns woken up. And as a trainer, I want to do that early in the session. Yep. Right. So if I'm really working on a movement pattern that I know I'm going to be working with, like upper body or whatever, for a while, I want to start with getting those movement patterns as clear as I can, getting their awareness of those movement patterns as clear as I can. Then I can go in and add it into adding a load, adding resistance, whatever I'm doing in terms of choreography or movement.
What's interesting
but I've got to get it woken up first.
Today, just literally today, a few hours ago, I was working with a client who he came in with a little bit of discomfort, rotator cuff last week, and what we did inflamed him a little bit. It's calmed down since. So I said, you know what? I had a feeling that he's a guy. He's fairly strong. I had a feeling he was going overboard with the amount of resistance he was using. So what I did is I took his resistance down and we went much more for motion. And what I learned from watching him is as soon as the resistance went up, quality of movement went way down. And all we were working on, I was doing shoulder extensions. So he was seated. He had his hands holding a band that were in front of him and pulling the band back, but focusing more on opening up the collarbone, squeezing the shoulder blades, working on pure retraction and getting the lats to fire with the trapezius, with the rhomboids, trying to get everything going, and woken up. And it took us probably 10 to 12 repetitions before I could feel that he was hitting it right. And once he did that, I said, okay, now I'll start counting the reps. Because it's like, you're not doing it until he did it right. And then I say, okay, now we can get it. And he did 20 repetitions after that. Again, we did a light resistance. And he said, oh, I feel this and I'm feeling fatigue. I'm not feeling, and that was the difference. Before he felt discomfort. Now he says, I'm just feeling fatigued. And I think I'm feeling it in the right muscles. And I was like, yes. Lowering the resistance, working on quality of movement, really changed the exercise for him. And he literally did 5 or 6 sets on his own sitting there because he wanted to ingrain the feeling. And I finally had to say, okay, you have to stop now because you're going to be so sore tomorrow. But ingraining that feeling so that he could really get it and working on quality of movement. And it worked. It worked great. And he really walked out of here thinking, okay, now I know what to do and I can do it properly. But again, with some guys, it's hard to change that thought process.
Not just guys. Like I would say, taking this even a step back a little bit farther, most people with their upper body do what they need to do to get the job done.
Yes.
Right? They're not thinking about quality of motion. They're just thinking, I've got to lift this thing up and I've got to put it over there. I've got to pick this screaming child up and put it in a car seat. Whatever the challenges that they're having, they're not thinking about what their biomechanics are at that moment for the most part. Right? So what I find with really all of my shoulder clients who have shoulder issues, who I really want to work on getting that either stronger and more functional or out of pain, I go back to the beginning and I just focus on quality of movement with the rotator cuff, quality of movement with the scapulothoracic joint, quality of movement with how the neck and the thoracic are organized with that, what's happening with the medial lateral rotational and the glenohumeral joint. And I've got to go back and really reorganize from, I'm kind of thinking of going back to the beginning, reorganize from the base up.
Yep.
And then, if we do that and we really do that well, everything can reorganize. It doesn't always take that long, but I've got to
Yep.
just reorganize it over time and taking it light and focusing on movement quality. Then I add load to it.
Yep.
Right? Once they've got the quality, then we start to add load and build that up. But until that quality's there, they're going to compensate like mad as soon as you put a load on.
And that's, I think, one of the challenges in fitness versus
Yeah.
Pilates.
Yes.
Is fitness, a lot of people feel like they need to lift heavy object, put down again. That's the mindset. And when you are dealing with people who have done that before, man or woman, but I typically say a lot of men because this is the typical guy I get is going to be someone who can afford me. So they're going to be in their mid 40s to 60 and above. Well, they used to lift weights. I used to play football. I used to lift weights in high school. I used to lift weights in college and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, okay, that was a different body ago. That's not the body you have today. You have to remember that. They want to go back and do their heavy squats and deadlifts and all of that. But like you said, they're going to think about what weight they used to use, and they're going to try and do something similar, even though they haven't lifted a weight in years. And they're just going to try and get the job done, no matter how hard we harp on them about proper movement. Sometimes it's a challenge to get them to do it right. And what I find I literally have to do, and I call it foundational training, is I start them I usually start them with exercises they've never done before. So they don't have...
There's novelty.
And there's novelty.
There's no pattern.
There's nothing ingrained in there yet. And then even when we get to a squat, I'll have them hold on to something, or I'll have them do stand up and sit down. And they don't really know why they're doing it. And I'm correcting here, correcting there. And then I'll take them into a squat and they're like, oh, so this is a squat. Okay. I say, yes, but now you're doing it properly.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, oh, yeah, this feels better. Or, it's a way to sort of sneak them in the back door of doing it without a whole lot of resistance, because the last thing a guy wants who may be ego-driven, we have a lot of type A personalities here in DC, and they come in and they are ego-driven, and they used to be able to squat 200 pounds, and you want to have them hold, 20 pounds max, and they're thinking, I'm wasting my time. I'm stronger than that. Sometimes you got to sneak it in the back door and convince them that quality is better. And once they do that, they're going to make greater gains. I remember when I first did this, I had a power lifter who, was lifting 500 pounds off his chest in a bench press, but he kept having shoulder issues. And so I said, okay, let's take you down, just the bar. And we did that for about 6 weeks. And he was so frustrated. But he was at his top max weight. He couldn't improve and hadn't for over a year and was frustrated. Well, by doing that for a long period of time and then slowly increasing with proper form, with better movement quality, getting him to move his scapula at the right time, getting him to move his arms at the right time, he actually exceeded in time his max weight, his previous max weight, and was shocked. But I had to erase and take him all the way back. And fortunately, he gave me a lot of latitude. There's a lot of athletes who wouldn't have done that.
Yeah, absolutely.
He gave me that latitude. So sometimes you do have to sort of sneak that in and really get them to understand that proper movement quality is going to get them further along than anything else.
So you had a client who was patient.
Yes.
Who was kind of willing to go down, or at least was willing to go down the path with you for long enough to make a difference, right? So a lot of people would have just been in and out the door, and that would have been that. You wouldn't have seen them again. This is always one of those interesting things, and we have this discussion a lot. I'm sure you have it in personal training as well. It's like, well, I'm not, what I'm doing isn't challenging enough for my client. My client wants more. Right? They want it to be harder, faster. And Pilates, this happens often. I'm sure it happens in personal training as well.
All the time.
And one of the things, and I don't know that this is entirely true, but there's part of it that's true, is I find that if I can challenge them on form, if I can basically, I'm giving their mind something that occupies them enough to get them out of thinking about the effort. I just bring your abs in, bring your legs closer together, do, whatever it is, really focusing on form with a bit of intensity, a bit of that same kind of training intensity that they would get with putting more weight on. I can sometimes, and again, this is after years and years and a lot of just, my own personal authority that I've gained over time. Like, I can make most people do what I want them to do.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody, but a whole lot of them are like, okay, I'll put up with this. I'm not sure it's the right thing. You're not hard enough, but I'm going to put up with this anyway.
Yep. When I teach my interns, a lot of times I say, you got to eventually give them their dessert in order to make them eat the vegetables. Okay, so I will pick 1 or 2 exercises that they're not going to undo everything that I've gotten done today, and we'll do it at the end. And those will be the challenging things. Sometimes I'll start them off with that, and that was weird. Emergency broadcast system.
Yes, the entire United States, for anybody who doesn't know, is testing the emergency broadcast system right now, apparently today. So that's, if you're hearing a beep on your line, that is what's happening.
That's what happened. Okay, so again, I will challenge them. I will pick a couple of exercises where I can burn them out, make them, I hate to say sore, but something that's not going to undo all of the movement things that we've done up until that point.
Yep.
And put those toward the end, or sometimes I will intersperse them. I had a client once who said, you know what? I used to coach basketball for kids. And I noticed that the girls would sit there and they'd all listen, but the boys wouldn't. They were all going crazy. So what I realized is I had to run them like crazy for 10 minutes. And then they might sit down quietly and listen for 5. Then you got to run them like crazy. So when I heard this was years ago, I was like, that's actually really smart for everybody. So sometimes I can give them a hard exercise that's they're going to feel like, I did that. And then I can get them to do the smaller things because they're tired.
Yep. And I always say hard but safe.
Oh, absolutely. No question.
Right. So for like for a lot of my clients, especially my male clients, when they first come in, I'll often start them before we do very much with long stretch, which is basically a plank version for those of you who don't know long stretch. Your hands are on the foot bar, you're putting back and forth. And they're like, number one, it's kind of a push-up position, which they're familiar with.
Yep.
And once you add the dynamic nature of the reformer moving back and forth, especially when you put a relatively light weight on it, it is hard.
Mm-hmm.
But generally not going to be unsafe unless there's specific issues that I have to be aware of. And it's like, I'll do that. I'll do a couple of other things that feel hard.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, okay, now we can take them down. So I call it working from the outside in instead of the inside out.
Yep.
Make them, I love that, just wear them out first, give them something hard. They can feel like they have accomplished something. Then you can back it out.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And for me being a woman, I grew up with a lot of brothers. So I learned quickly that there's the alpha effect.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly when I'm a woman training a man or a very athletic woman, both situations are quite similar. I have to alpha them first. They have to know that I can kick their butt if I need to.
Mm-hmm.
And once I've done that and they're satisfied that I could, they'll often calm down.
Yeah, that's true.
But they got to know I'm going to be tough enough. If I'm not going to be tough enough, they're like, this is a waste of my time. What am I doing here?
It's very true. So we got a little bit off the shoulder track, but I think that's important information for people to take home with them. Because realistically, how do we work with clients who have that sort of mindset? And it's true. Mm-hmm. It's true. When I am dealing with people who have glenohumeral pain or discomfort, getting them to just move properly is so important. And we need to get that scapulohumeral connection and synergy. We need to get those muscles working together correctly, in order for everything to work harmoniously and not cause us additional pain down the road.
Exactly.
So that's the sort of thing that I want to make sure that I focus on with my clients. And like I say, I did it today with this gentleman, and he walked out of here thinking, okay, I got this now. So he felt successful.
And he knew what to do.
Yes.
Not just successful, but empowered.
Empowered, great word. Yes.
Like now he knows where. Like what I always say is, you have to sometimes give them the experience of where you want them to go.
Yep.
So they can find their way to it.
Yep.
If they've never experienced that, you can talk till you're blue in the face. They're not going to get what you're saying.
Yep.
And that's not going to make any sense. If they experience it and then lock in their nervous system, they can then start to find their way to that experience in other exercises.
Yep. Absolutely. We covered a lot today. Like
So,
usual.
guys, I hope, like usual. So, again, the synergies of the shoulder, and we talked about it from many different angles. A training angle, but also some anatomy, and then some muscular relationships, and some philosophy a little bit in there too, just about how to think about the shoulder. And again, to Brian's point, proper mechanics. And I always think of the mechanics as happening first from the bones and the joints, and the muscles will follow over time.
Yeah.
So I really focus a lot, just like Brian does, on quality of movement, quality of how those joints are behaving, how the synergies between all of the shoulder girdle joints are acting. And then once I get that organized, then I start to add more load to it and more complexity.
And I want to challenge everybody who's listening today. When you have a moment, I want you to go through your anatomy. I want you to look at all of those muscles in and around the scapula and look at their motions. What are their jobs? What are they actually doing? So you can actually see, oh, when this muscle works, it's going to pull the scapula this way. And then I want you to look at what's stretching, what's contracting, what's stretching, what dance partners go with what. Because with different movements, you're going to have different dance partners. And like you said, it is a square dance. And that's a wonderful way to put it. You're going to be changing partners constantly depending on what you're doing. And we want to make sure people are strong enough for real life, not just being strong in the gym where you're lifting up in lateral raises. I've got, 30 pounds in each hand and everything. Great. Does that transfer into real life? Am I going to be able to carry a wiggly baby into the car? Am I going to be able to pick up this 50-pound thing of dog food, carry it upstairs, and then dump it without spilling it all over the place? Dump it into the bin. Things like that. I want to make sure we can transfer into real life. So you're going to be able to see those actual dance partners and see, okay, how do I need to get them to work? When you really understand that, that's when you're going to be able to see dysfunction. That's when you're going to be able to see muscular imbalance and be able to say, okay, I am seeing elevation. Yes, first trap is firing too much, but what's not firing? Aha. Now I know what to look for. And the next time we talk about the shoulder, we'll get into a lot more of conditions and imbalances and things like that. We'll go a lot more deeper into detail, but I wanted to make sure that we covered today a lot more of the anatomy so that everybody's sort of starting on the same page and understands the synergy of it.
Awesome.
All right. So,
well,
we did cover a lot today. Thank you guys for joining us. As always, you can always reach us on our socials. movingconvos@gmail.com is how you can reach us. If you have any questions or comments, tell us how we're doing. Tell us what you like, what you don't like, all that sort of thing. We're constantly improving. We hope we are. We hope in the last
That's our goal.
17 or 18 ones that we've recorded, my goal is that every time we get a little bit better, and we're continuing to improve. So if you have any suggestions, feel free to let us know. And you can get us on Twitter and Instagram at Moving Combos, as well as our personal handles as well. And yeah, next time maybe we'll cover a little bit more about the shoulder and go into a little deeper in depth.
Look forward to talking to you guys soon.
All right, we'll talk to you later.